So I've been pretty focused on this concept of logic as a universal principle. The idea being that really everything in the universe, if you will, is logical. The way that stars form, evolution, the way that nature functions, there's a logic behind all of it. It happens the way that it should happen. And when it comes to humans and the way we function, the way it manifests out is that we always do what is logical to us in the moment. Short of a mental illness or some sort of mental defect, if you will, we are constantly running calculations in our minds, kind of cost-benefit analyses, and we always act in accordance with those. So in the moment, right, we make a decision, we take an action, we say something. That's all based on a calculation our mind did that said, hey, that's the thing you should do right now. Sometimes it conflicts with what we aspire to be, but in that moment, it's exactly what we want to be, what we want to do, right? The calculation is run and it outputs something and we do that thing. And I've talked in other videos about, one of the things you want to do is, once you understand that, is to ensure that you run that calculation as thoroughly, as accurately, as completely as you can. And there's different kind of functioning parts of your brain that handle our thinking. One is more of an autopilot. You drive up to a red light, you just stop, you don't even think about it. There's that part of the brain. And then there's the deep kind of thoughtful, analytical part of the brain that really assesses things. If you're looking to get a new job, that part of the brain would kick in and you start thinking about the pros and the cons of it. When it comes to important decisions or important actions, ideally you want that thoughtful part of the brain doing the calculation, right? We talked about it as, you can have an 8th grader who kind of has a basic understanding of like pre-algebra versus a PhD in math. Those are the two parts of the brain. You want the PhD doing the calculation if it matters. But I also think there is value to looking backwards at past decisions, past actions, and assessing your math in those scenarios too. Particularly when you take some action or you make some decision and you look back on it and you say, hey, that was the wrong decision. I shouldn't have done that, right? I don't know why I did that. That was the wrong thing to do. That's the flag, right? That's the flag where seemingly you're telling yourself, I did something illogical. I did something I didn't want to do. That's the flag where you should say, well, actually, no, that's not true. It was logical to me in the moment. I did what I wanted to do in the moment. I just need to understand why that was the case, right? So that's the thing you want to dig in on. You want to understand what that calculation you ran was. And maybe it was an 8th grader that ran it. Maybe it was a 3rd grader, whatever it is. Assuming it was poorly run, you want to get underneath the covers of that and understand what went wrong in there. Was there an error in calculation? Was there an error in order of operations? Were the inputs off? What was it? Because it was logical and you acted in accordance with that calculation, but something went wrong seemingly with the calculation. So you want to understand that. And then you want to understand what the calculation should have been. In hindsight, looking back on it, what were the things I should have changed? What were the inputs I wasn't accounting for? What was the error in calculation that I did that I would fix going forward? That's how you truly learn from a mistake. So let's use an example for me. And I've talked about this before, so I'll just kind of stick with it. I have a decent job that isn't, it's not a horrible job. It pays relatively well, but it is not my life's mission. It's not something I get deep pleasure or fulfillment out of. And when I look back over the last 10 years, I say, well, I don't love the work I do. I don't know why I keep doing it. It doesn't make sense. Like I keep doing the same type of work and I keep telling myself I don't like it. So there seems to be an irrationality or an illogical aspect to that, which again is the flag where you dig in and say, well, can't be, right? There's something there. I'm doing what I want to do. I don't think I have a mental illness. So what's going on? What's the calculation I'm running? So again, that's step one, right? Identify it, that something seems irrational, figure out the calculation and how you ran it. Now, typically what your mind will do at that point is it will start feeding you excuses and say, here is what went wrong in the calculation, or here's why you did this thing that seemed irrational. And it will say things like, well, you have commitments, you have a family situation at home, maybe some health issues with a family member, you have kids and a mortgage, you have all this different stuff. Maybe the job market wasn't that good. All these things are meant to say you didn't actually have control over the situation, right? The calculation that was run, you were forced into a certain answer. There wasn't actually a calculation and a decision that was made. And although these things might be true, I think one of the key components of the value of this premise, this principle, is that you do have control. You do have agency over these things. It may not always be easy, but you do have control. So you go from a place where first you say, I don't know, I just did the wrong thing, I shouldn't have done it. Well, no, there was logic, and you did it because you wanted to do it. So let's understand what the logic was, like where did the calculation go wrong? Typically then you go to, well, I didn't actually have control over it. I couldn't even run the calculation here, I just was forced into this. And that's where I would challenge myself to say, well, not good enough, right? That's probably just protecting me from an inconvenient truth that I don't want to face. It might be true that the job market is tough and that I do have a wife, with some health issues or other commitments that I have. But does that explain the fact that, well, then why right now do I feel like it's the wrong decision, right? That irrationality is still there. I know all those things to be true, but yet I'm still looking at it and saying, why didn't I change jobs? Why didn't I do something that was more meaningful to me? So it suggests that there's a deeper kind of inconvenient truth that you don't want to face. So you have to go to that next level why and say, well, why really? What really was the calculation? I know there was a logic. I know I made a decision and I did what I wanted to do. What really was I assessing in that? What's the piece that I'm not accounting for? And perhaps there's something, and in my case, I would say, where you always feel like there's more time, right? That's part of it. So yeah, I haven't changed jobs yet, but I'm not 40 yet, so I still have time. So I've been intentionally, deliberately staying in this job thinking at some point I'll get to it and I'll switch. That would be logical. That would explain why your calculation would output stay in the same job. Maybe there's something else to it. Maybe I am afraid of the work and the effort it would take to do something more meaningful. I'm afraid of putting myself out there and failing. Too lazy to actually do the hard work it would take, and it's much easier to just be complacent and stay in the path that I'm in. These are things that I likely don't want to admit to myself, but they're probably the true underlying components of the calculation that led me to sticking with a job that I don't really like or enjoy, seemingly in an irrational way. So you factor those parts in and you say, okay, well, now I see the logic. If you're afraid of failing and you're afraid you don't have what it takes to succeed and do the hard work, if those things are true, then when you run that calculation, it would say, hey, stay in your current job. And again, it's no surprise that your mind protects you from that and tries to say, you were just being crazy, or you couldn't help it, right? There was a situation in the job market that wouldn't allow you to do it. You get more to the truth of the situation. The next step then becomes, okay, I understand what the calculation was and why I chose to do what I did. If I believe that's the wrong decision though, what should the calculation be? What am I missing to make this calculation output an answer, which is go do something different, go find a different job, right? You have to factor that in and say, what am I not accounting for in this cost benefit analysis? Perhaps it's the benefit side. Perhaps it's what really thinking through what the upside is if you pick something that you love to do and you feel fulfilled by. Maybe you're not thinking enough about how happy it'll make you, how much better it'll make your family life, and how much happier your wife will be and your son will be because you're happier. Maybe you're not considering enough of that. Maybe you're overstating the cost. Maybe this fear that if I do it and I fail, the world's gonna end or I'll be so embarrassed. That's not true, right? You're not weighting that correctly. That fear as an emotion is affecting your equation, and it's making it seem like it's this huge multiplier effect on it where the cost side shoots up so high that you could never do that, but that's not actually accurate. You need to more accurately weight that input and factor that input in and recognize that that's actually not true. It's not that big of a risk. Whatever it might be. The idea is it could be all sorts of different things. The value in this is more in the exercise. And it may take multiple iterations of working through it and talking through it with other people to actually try and get to the root true answer of it. But the point is, by accepting the principle that everything we do is logical and there's a reason why we do it and we pick the thing we want to do, it gives us the motivation to say, okay, there's something for me to figure out there. So it's not a lost cause, it's not just random, there's something for me to figure out. So that's the first value. The second value is it makes you recognize that you have some agency and control over it, right? It's not out of your control completely. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe there's circumstances where it truly dictates it as such. But more times than not, we tell ourselves that with excuses, but the reality is we made a deliberate decision. We might not like the decision we made now. We may wish we had handled it differently. There's all different things that can come into play. There may be an inconvenient truth that we don't want to face, which forces us to think we don't have control, but the reality is we do have some control. And then lastly, it allows you to think about what you should have calculated, where the errors are in that calculation. Given that there was some logic, given that you do have control over it, if you could do it again, what would have been the right way to assess it? Acknowledging those inconvenient truths, acknowledging the truth of the situation. How should I have run that calculation as more of a PhD level mathematician to get to the output? Now, there's a chance when you do that, you still get the same output. And in my situation, it still says, hey, you should just stick with your current job. Despite the fact that, you regret some of it and there's things you're not happy about, the calculation still spits out that that's the right answer for you. And if that's the case and you've done the thoughtful analysis and work, well, then so be it. But there's also a chance that you run it and you get a different output, and then you work towards that. The idea is the logic always stays. You just want the calculation behind the logic to be as sophisticated and accurate and thorough and complete as possible. And this process should help you get to that point.